Chapter 35. Do Us Part. The atmosphere was loud and cheerful up in the Cloud City, the moon high in the sky, and yet the surrounding area was lit up like the day as the festivities continued. Pegasi and some other ponies with cloud walking spells were all enjoying the various stalls and attractions dotting the aftermath of the Wonderbolts charity show, and all proceeds made from those stalls would further boost the bits gained for charity as well. The main Wonderbolts team, that being Spitfire, Soaring, Rainbow Dash, Scootaloo, and Little Wing, were the main attraction and hosts of this event, though other high-profile figures such as Princesses Celestia, Luna, and Twilight were also in attendance. Princess Miyamori Cadenza and her family, Prince Shining Armor and Princess Flurryheart, had sent their apologies ahead of time for their lack of attendance. As it was, the royal schedule wasn't always beholden to one's wishes. Little Wing, now 22, was with the other Wonderbolts as they mingled around a sizable cloud garden hanging above the other festivities. The garden was hosting the more elite ponies who had been attending the charity event, nobles from Canterlot and the likes. Little Wing would have, in all honesty, preferred to be done with the commoners, laughing and having fun at the stalls, rather than listening to the unicorns around them discuss prestige and other rubbish like that. But there wasn't much she could do at the time. She knew her bride was down there, somewhere, waiting for Little Wing to join her. Their wedding had been a few months before the event she now found herself in, but it and the following 2-week honeymoon in Zebrica seemed like a mere day before. 2 weeks of sun and bliss, the likes of which she couldn't have imagined before experiencing it. And it was all spent with just Misty, a time when neither of them could have been more joyous. Too soon had it come to an end, as all good things do, and now she found herself with her squad mates, all simply trying to appease the aristocracy around them. The Wonderbolts were also all still in their flight suits, albeit with their hoods down. The Alicorns were at the other end of the garden, talking with a pony by the name of Fancy Pants. Little Wing had never actually seen Celestia and Luna up close, only at a distance, like now and during shows where they sat in the royal box. But while that was going on, the last noble to approach them had been called away, giving the team a moment to themselves.
Try to look a little less bored, Skips,
Spitfire admonished, using Little Wing's nickname, earned by her being so excited on her first official day as a main team member that she had practically skipped and pranced all over the place.
The nobles like it when they think you're paying attention to them, when we're not. At all,
Rainbow Dash quipped with a smirk.
Seriously, who wants to have a go on the High Striker when we're done with this stuff? We only want to because you'd win,
Scootaloo noted.
Yeah, we'll see,
Spitfire muttered.
But you know regulation. The Wonderbolts set up the event. We've got to stay at least a couple hours to keep the powers that be happy. I don't think the princesses would care,
Scootaloo commented.
I meant the nobles,
the captain retorted.
Describing them as powers might be an exaggeration, but it's procedure nevertheless.
I'm sure it won't be too much longer before some of us could mingle down there, Soren stated. The captain and I will probably have to stay a little longer to have some parting words, but I don't see why the rest of you couldn't go on.
And we thank the captain and her executive officer for their sacrifices,
Rainbow Dash quipped.
I'll keep the juniors safe while you're gone.
Scootaloo and Little Wing rolled their eyes. Hey, I'm just glad we got to come at all, Soren remarked. We need to thank that Silver Breeze for full setting.
Yeah, never thought I'd see the day,
Rainbow muttered to herself with a small frown.
He couldn't say no to the bits,
Little Wing explained, though held a small smile on her face.
And I think he might be fond of children. Who knew? Full sitting and hidden soft sides aside,
Spitfire interrupted.
You're all juniors to me, Lieutenant Rainbow Dash, and if you dare call me Grandma for that, I'll have you do 1,000 laps for insubordination.
Rainbow made a face that made it seem like that was no big deal.
Every hour.
The face dissolved, and Little Wing couldn't help but smirk with the rest of them as Rainbow's own fell away into nothingness.
I'm not surprised you're taking it as a challenge, Rainbow.
A new regal voice noted in amusement. When they all turned to the source, Little Wing saw Princess Twilight Sparkle steadily approaching them before she joined the group altogether.
How are you all? Twilight, get as bored of the nobility as we are?
Rainbow Dash asked knowingly.
Dreadfully so, but needs must.
Twilight replied.
Everything seems to be winding down now, though. Some of you could probably get away with sneaking away while the captain and I go talk rules and procedure with Blue Blood or something. Is that a hint?
Twilight gave Rainbow a bemused stare.
Yes, Rainbow, that's a hint. Now scram before I drag you along too.
Rainbow Dash laughed.
Hey, don't need to tell me twice. Right, Captain?
Spitfire looked as bemused as the princess, but she didn't seem to argue.
Alright, dismissed. Try not to have too much fun without me and Soaring. We'll try,
Rainbow Dash remarked, looking towards Soaring next.
See you later, honey. It's a promise,
he replied, departing with Twilight and Spitfire so the Wonderbolts could make their escape. Something they all very promptly did. With a single flap of their wings, they glided away from the garden and down into the crowds of ponies below. And Little Wing was just as glad as her sisters to get out of there and be able to stretch her wings. It may have been for a good cause, but there was only so much of the nobility any sane pony could take.
Well, now that we're officially off duty, what games do we hit first?
Scootaloo asked, examining the varying stalls around them. Now that was the question, wasn't it? Ponies all around, young and old, were all enjoying themselves on whatever the event had to offer. With all the bits she could see being thrown around, they'd be coming away with a good haul to give away. Some to orphanages, some to wildlife sanctuaries, and the ponies displaced in the Griffin Empire by the Sovereign Empire group. The details would be finalized after they knew exactly how much they had to give, so for the time being, all they had to do was add their own share to the pile. Speaking of griffins, a few were also among the ponies that night. Not just griffins, a few other species were present, but it was a group of griffins that had passed Little Wing by as they were deciding on what to do. There were three. One female griffin leading her excitable young son towards a stall with large teddy bears up for the prizes. The third was a black feathered and furred male who didn't seem to be with the other two. While the former duo rushed on ahead, he stopped briefly to glare at the trio of Pegasi. And then a far lovelier sight stepped in between them.
Hey!
Misty Gus said cheerfully as she booped Little Wing on the nose, causing the Siamere to go cross-eyed for a moment before shaking her head to rectify herself.
Misty!
Little Wing shared a quick kiss with her wife.
Good timing. We just got relieved by the captain. I figured.
Misty Gus replied with a giggle.
Don't mind me joining you, right? If it means getting to watch Wings squirm, I'm in.
Rainbow Dash said casually as she began to lead the group towards the previously mentioned High Striker.
What? I don't squirm!
Little Wing protested.
You kinda do.
Scootaloo agreed.
I think Misty just has that effect on you.
Little Wing's blush was beginning to show through her fur, most blatantly around the tips of her ears. Of course, this was all the evidence they needed, and a round of hearty chuckles sounded as Misty gave her special sun pony a nuzzle on the cheek, one which Little Wing gladly returned.
Whatever you say,
Little Wing said, dripping a wing over Misty as they continued to walk. The group arrived at the game Rainbow was, like a filly, bouncing slightly on her hooves in her eagerness to play. Little Wing, Misty Gus, and Scootaloo stood a few feet back, as Rainbow Dash provided the stallion overseeing the game a couple of bits. They all watched in an amused anticipation as Rainbow Dash sized up the hammer and then the bell high above them. With a smirk, she looked back towards her sister and sister-in-law, confident in every conceivable way.
Piece of cake,
the prismatically maned mare boasted, picking up the hammer in her mouth while managing to say, "What's this?" Rainbow Dash reared back as the others watched, hammer raised into the air and ready to give the decisive blow that would either supplement or wound her pride. And it was then that, for Little Wing, everything seemed to happen in almost slow motion. Out of the corner of her eye, Little Wing just managed to spot that dark-colored griffin from earlier return in a severe hurry. What's more, he was holding something. Something that made the onlookers he passed look on with questions in their eyes, or shrieks of alarm for those who were certain it was very much real. Wooded and metal, a bow drawn back and hitched into place, an object placed against it, aimed forwards and snarling like an animal with its eyes set right on Rainbow Dash. He had a crossbow, and the string was snapping forwards as his talon pressed down into the trigger. Even as a few patrolling guards spotted his act and made a mad dash to stop him, they would apprehend the griffin, no doubt. But they were too late to prevent what he had started. Rainbow was swinging the hammer down, eyes only on her target as even Misty and Scootaloo remained blissfully unaware of what was transpiring behind them. But Little Wing saw, and Little Wing decided. The arrow was racing forwards with deadly intent, bearing down towards her older sister as she remained ignorant. But Little Wing was not prepared to watch her elder sister die. So she shot forwards, forehooves reaching outwards as her wings gave an almighty flap. Rainbow Dash was caught completely off guard as Little Wing barreled into her spine, knocking the hammer out of her mouth and sending it flying off to the side. Little Wing heard the arrow hit something, but had no time to see where. All she could feel was the adrenaline pumping through her veins, she and her sister impacting with soft cloud. They skidded a few meters, and then came to a halt. And when Little Wing looked around, she could see every pony in the area looking over to either them or the now restrained griffin with wide eyes, filled with shock and horror. For the Empire! The Sovereign Empire griffin cawed, trying to fight off the guards before they hit him around the back of the head with the hilt of a blade and knocked him out. Little Wing breathed a sigh of relief, looking around to see her sister intact and equally as wide-eyed, staring into Little Wing's own.
Close one,
Little Wing remarked, the adrenaline fading and a supreme sense of tiredness beginning to spread throughout her body. And then Misty screamed. It was an anguished scream, filled with terror and sadness that could not even be described and given justice by those who heard it that night.
Wing?
Rainbow Dash muttered with a trembling voice, much to her little sister's confusion. Then she felt something wet running down her barrel. Wet and red. That was never going to come out of the uniform. So strange that was Little Wing's first thought at the sight, as if she couldn't comprehend it. Until she looked a little harder. There was the arrow, sticking so deep into her side that it was probably poking through the other side too. And given that she could feel the wet patches forming from both sides of her body, that was almost certainly the case. Though that wet feeling was quickly dying away, along with all other feeling.
Wing!
Rainbow Dash shouted in grief, reaching forwards and cradling her little sister as her usual bravado crumbled and was replaced with something more desperate and begging. Scootaloo and Misty also rushed to her side, sitting down beside her and whispering promises of help and medical attention.
No.
Rainbow muttered before her eyes fell onto the arrow.
We've got to get it out! No!
Scootaloo shouted back,
It'll only increase the bleeding. She needs a doctor. Please, 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 please.
Misty was begging as her hysterical cries echoed around their now silent surroundings.
You're going to be all right. You're going to be all right. You've got me. Please. Misty.
Littlewing muttered, trying and wanting to say more. But nothing more would come. All further shouts became distant. The sights around her, still open eyes blurring together. All feeling became numb, and a familiar darkness began to creep in. It was different this time, though. Before, she had been unaware of its passing. But now she was painfully so. And she was scared. Her breathing ceased, her eyes closing as the last thing she saw was the sight of a lavender alicorn flying down towards her with urgency in her movements, and the broken features of the pony she loved. And then she died.
Hello, Emma.
Penumbra greeted, a smile on her face.
Hello, Littlewing.